All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. There's still a couple people trickling in, but since we know that this is the last session of the day, and this is pretty much the only thing standing between us and drinks at the Summit Bash, which I hope you guys all plan to attend. By the way, it's at 3rd and Howard. We're gonna try to keep this loose and keep this kind of fun. This is basically going to be a discussion. We want this to be interactive. We want you guys to contribute. So I'll be running up and down the aisles and try to fight this light to try to stick this mic in your face and have you actually engage these guys a little bit. So before we go into the format and all that stuff, I want to take a quick opportunity to get each of these guys 30 seconds to introduce themselves and let you know who they are. Basically, the point of this discussion is to try to talk about how deploying agile in large teams, how does that actually work? So we've kind of assembled a crack staff from Atlassian, and then we also have a special guest from Opower there in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and give the mic to Jean-Michel here, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, my name's Jean-Michel. I'm the new VP of Engineering at Atlassian. And I guess my experience with Agile is I spent 6 years in a huge open source project doing Agile development, I guess before it was called, it actually had a name, and decided that we wanted to do the same thing within IBM, which is a huge corporate environment. How do we do Agile with 300 people in IBM? And had a blast for the next 6 years. And now I'm in Atlassian trying to have even more fun. So off to Paul.
Well, all right, go ahead, Paul.
Paul Slade, I'm the development manager for the JIRA product at Atlassian. So we've been doing Agile for a little while in JIRA. In terms of dimension, we have about 30 developers in JIRA. We have 4 sub-teams of 5 to 6 people each. Does that add up? Close-ish. And yeah, that's the sort of scale we're working at, 2-week iterations. Bring the questions on.
So like they said, I'm the only non-Atlassian guy up here. So my name is Jeff Barrett. I'm the head of engineering for a company called Opower. We make energy efficiency software. We have about 60 people in engineering. The teams we usually have between 7 and 10 teams, and we do 3-week iterations with Agile. And at the end of every iteration, we actually push to production for all of our customers. This is the second company where I've essentially led the transition from what was sort of a haphazard waterfall version of development to what is a fairly aggressive version of Agile. That's me.
I'm Jonathan Gilbert. I'm Paul's counterpart for Confluence, so I'm the Confluence development manager. I've been doing it for about 2 years, and the Confluence team is somewhat similar to the JIRA team in size and structure, but they're run slightly differently. Sub-teams again, but similar style.
I'm Josh Graham. I am a new SaaS architect, so I look after dragging the products into the cloud. So if you're having any questions about that, come and see me tomorrow in the Guru Room. I've been, for the last 6 years, consulting in large agile consultancies like ThoughtWorks, teams from 2 to 200, running mixed mode projects, transforming organizations to use Agile, both in the development space and across the organization. And looking forward to talking about the challenges you have and seeing what you want. Yeah.
Cool. Well, clearly these guys don't have any notion of timekeeping because 30 seconds went by really fast for all these guys. But all right, so a couple ground rules just to make sure we kind of keep on topic. So the first one is that no ponies, okay? We don't really want to get into feature discussions about why doesn't Greenhopper do that or why doesn't Confluence do this. No ponies allowed. So that's number one. Number two, no rat holes. So we don't want to get off topic. Or sorry, don't want to dwell on one topic for too long. So I'll try to keep the conversation going if we do that. And then last but not least, no consensus. We don't want everyone just to say, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, that's what I do too. Because we know that in agile development and agile practices, everyone really does unique things for their own situation. And so hopefully we can get a little bit of a debate going. So what I've done is I want you guys to ask questions, but I figured the first one, does anybody want to ask the first question? All right, we got a volunteer. Sweet, off the hook. These guys already answered my first question anyway, so that's pretty good. All right.
Thanks. Hey,
My first question is about the smaller sub-teams, and how do you deal with knowledge transfer between the teams? What techniques do you use?
Okay, so let me quickly speak for JIRA. We have a couple of sort of socially driven techniques. One is called the pub. One is called the We console, and I guess the other one is called the lunch table. So a lot of communication actually happens outside of the sort of formal workplace. They're a tight bunch. The whole team are quite tight. You know, they lunch together and go out together, so that works. In terms of formal structure, at the team lead or scrum master level, we have a scrum of scrum stand-up every day, which really is the main conduit of communication across the teams. And obviously each team has their stand-ups every day.
I think I would agree with the use of alcohol actually is a big part of it. There's a lot of people going out after. In fact, when you break a build at Opower, the way that you actually pay that debt off is you buy your team a round of drinks. But the stand-ups are a big part of that as well. And we actually have every iteration, all of the leads have to get together and put their backlog up on a wall, and then everybody has to look at everyone else's backlog, and they're essentially saying, you know, we've got a dependency here with you guys, we need you to move that around, or they'll call BS on what somebody else has in a backlog, or they may actually have a recommendation for how somebody should do something differently. But having one place where you can actually see the larger picture and giving people an opportunity to trade information has been a really big help for us. And we actually use kind of like an internal Twitter thing as well.
Yeah, so related to that, you know, when you have a scrum, we had like 8 teams around the world, so we couldn't bring everybody out for a beer every night. But one of the things about communication and knowledge transfer that we find was really important was like the friction points between the teams. So the friction point between, you know, Confluence and JIRA and the studio team, and you know, one way to do it kind of, you know, with the tool is we found that we created a new issue type that we called an adoption item, and we wanted to kind of you know, exchange the information about what those friction points between the teams were in each iteration. And when we had our stand-ups, instead of going through the whole backlog, which could get pretty long when you got like 200 people, we went through the friction points, which were, in this iteration, we're adding new API. Our expectation is that API is going to be adopted. You know, so we kind of talked through the friction points as kind of like a higher level discussion between a large team, and that really worked well for us. And we put them in the tool, and they actually ended up in the backlog as well, which was good.
The couple of things I wanted to add, Confluence team runs very similar to the JIRA team, so all the above I think we do as well. Additionally, a couple of things we've seen, when there's teams that are working on sort of closely rated areas, we actually do cross-team code reviews now. So when there's some area which are two teams working very similar, we'll have a code review done by the other team to keep them in the loop, and so they can see generally what's going on the other team. Additionally to that, what was my other point? I've forgotten.
We're all agreeing.
Yeah, I know you're going to disagree.
Well, I just wanted to also highlight that there's other ways to communicate rather than even just the very informal, but communities of practice. So we've got a bunch of people that are interested in things like DevOps, functional programming, and they're across the organization. It doesn't matter what team they're in. Also, if you're in a distributed environment, so you may have team members around the place, even us in 2 separate offices across the road, it can be a chasm. And there are digital techniques like Skype. We second people in different teams, so studio team members go to JIRA and Confluence and pair, and likewise they come to us. It gives us a really good insight into the features that are being developed and how you know, we have to integrate them in a very complex way. So there are other good ways, but I don't think that was a contentious question.
Anybody else do something unique that hasn't already been mentioned to facilitate communication? Come on. All right.
Do you ever bring all the teams together? Do you ever bring all the teams together? Like, we're tossing around whether or not we have, whether we now have like a whole team meeting, maybe at the beginning of a sprint or end of a sprint, to kind of collaborate on how that sprint went, things of that nature?
Yeah, the VP of Engineering will do a quarterly update, where it's all the developers, and then we have a monthly company gathering as well, where it's even broader topics.
We also have on the per product, the sub-team level, at the end of sprints, I think both the JIRA and Confluence team do, we have a demo session where everyone who's worked on 20% stuff in their own time, or the features that they worked on for those 2 weeks, they demo to the rest of the team so they can critique it and generally see what's going on.
All right. Anybody else got a question? Oh, I saw him first, so I'm going to go over here. I'll come back.
Thank you. I have a question relating to the gentleman from Opower. Said that you put the both backlogs or everybody's backlog on a board. How do you do that? Is there a certain tool you use, or do you do it all manually?
So the inspiration for this was actually last year's Agile conference. Salesforce did a phenomenal presentation about how they scaled Agile to a team of like 600 people. And one of the things that they do, which was our motivation, was, I forget the periodicity, but essentially every team puts their backlogs on a wall in a gigantic room, and about 150 people attend, and they essentially cater it with beer and food and stuff like that. And everyone essentially walks around the room and looks at the backlogs for all of the teams inside of Salesforce. And it sort of bubbles up to the surface a lot of things going on that are related to other teams. And so that was our sort of inspiration for that. The way that we do it is we actually have, initially it was a big cork board in our DC office, and we would have people put physical cards on that board and then start from there. But as soon as we opened an office here in San Francisco, we had to develop a tool to do it. So essentially we have something that integrates with JIRA, but it's just swim lanes. You have the teams across the top and the iterations across the side, and then you drag and drop the cards in between the swim lanes to figure out where things are going to fit, and it's shareable for anybody that wants to log in and see it.
The reason I want to know is because we're looking at doing something like that, and I want to know if there's something electronically we can use, or we have to do it all manually.
Yeah, I think the tool that we developed is it might actually be available via open source. I think it's called Estimotion, and you're welcome to check it out. I think we have it on GitHub, but it might be a little early days for other folks that are not our teams to use it. But you're welcome to try and ask us questions on how to get it running.
If you can avoid doing it electronically, do it physically. It's far more important and impactful. But with a distributed team and multiple branches, then it's sort of unavoidable. But the physicality of cards and being able to see them and move them is very important.
Anybody have a follow-up to that before we change anything?
So you mentioned when you have the big team of 600 and you guys got into a room together, what did you do when you have a lot of changes that happen on a daily basis? Because I imagine getting that kind of attendance is probably maybe a once every 2 weeks at best. So if you have to do things more frequently, what would you suggest?
So that's typically what the stand-ups are for. So first of all, our team isn't 600. Ours is only about 60. That's Salesforce is at about 600. But for us, we do still have a lot of moving pieces, and every day the teams do get together and figure out what's going on in their daily stand-ups. And the one rule we have about the stand-ups is that you can't have it at the same time as someone else's. And that way, anyone from any team can actually attend a stand-up for another team to actually see what's going on and provide feedback and stuff like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess at the bottom of our issue is we don't have the dedicated resources yet from a development standpoint. So when we go through that, we have right now probably 80% are business users, product owners, and then 20% developers. So when we do the stand-ups like that, we inherently have about 2 hours worth of stand-ups every day. That takes away from our ability to develop. So trying to find a way to, I guess, we're not going to get to a point where we can have dedicated resources anytime soon. So finding a way to be able to increase efficiency with the stand-ups, and if there's something in the tool.
I think anytime a stand-up has so many attendants that it takes 2 hours to go through, it's probably not actually a stand-up. So what you probably want to do is get those people into smaller groups. They each have stand-ups with the full teams, and then it becomes sort of a scrum of scrum stand-up that maybe happens daily or maybe every other day or something like that. I feel like I'm answering too many questions here. Does one of you guys want to? Is that's probably what I would do. I mean, a 2 hour, it's not a stand-up if it takes longer than 10 minutes, and some people might go 15, but that's probably too long as well.
Yeah.
Are you sitting down when you're doing the stand-up? That's an indicator. All kidding aside, that is a big rule.
Wow, that's insane. Sorry. I pity your feet.
Right. What kind of documentation artifacts do you actually have in your projects? Like,
There might be a wiki product that can help.
So let me speak for JIRA quickly. We're actually pretty light on documentation. We will start with a spec-ish thing on a Confluence page, and we try and translate that to a set of stories in a backlog as quick as we can. And then from then on, the only documentation effort is for the end-user documentation that we put on confluence.atlassian.com. So it's pretty light.
All right. Anybody else have a comment
I
on
was
that?
going to say that if you need compliance documentation, then retrospectively writing it. So writing it in the past tense, what you did, not what you think you're going to do, is very valuable because predictive documents aren't really worth much.
I have a question about testing. Do you have dedicated QA people? And what is your automation coverage? Do you have any manual testing that still has to happen, or is it 100% automated?
So I'll speak for Confluence. We have, I think, our ratio of QA to developers is fairly low. I think the goal is to have one QA person per sub-team, so that's a sub-team of 5 or 6. We don't even have that many currently, which means that developers are responsible for a lot of the QA. That has the benefit that they take on more responsibility for it. We've swung in different directions, and we've seen when there's more QA, the developers are less responsible for getting it at that final mile. And for automated testing, we don't actually have coverage metrics, but we are aware of all the important stuff. We have automated testing for that. For the manual testing, we still have that for definitely drop shadows and things that are very hard to test in an automated fashion. We do, and they tend to happen at periodic times, every fortnight or something. But generally, we try and make everything automated if we can, and we have Selenium tests, we have QUnit tests, as well as integration tests, unit tests, etc., etc.
Anybody else want to take a stab?
So we have, out of 60, only 3 of those people are actually QA testers in the sort of traditional manual testing sense with scripts that you follow. The rest of the team are either software engineers that are working on features or things like that, or they're software engineers in tests, sort of a la Microsoft or Google, who are only writing automated tests to exercise functionality. So there's, for us as well, there's a heavy sort of focus on getting things as automated as possible, but there are things that sort of can slip through the cracks that only a human being can see.
How many engineers do you have working on the automation? How many
So
engineers?
it's roughly, right now we're about 3 software engineers for every software engineer in tests. And we're finding that's not quite enough to get things through the pipeline. We probably need to be a little bit closer to 2.5 software engineers per engineer in test. And it's really hard to find people who want to only do that job. Well, to do a half person as well, that one's fun. But it's really important to have somebody who is a full-fledged software engineer. The challenges are just different when you're doing testing. But it's also important that those people, for us, we found that if you just have somebody who typically does feature development and you ask them to go do engineer and test work, they're not coming from a quality mindset, and so they may not really push against all of the edge cases to break things. It's a mental shift that we found having dedicated people for makes a big difference.
So you,
You're doing agile, right? So you've written the tests first before you wrote any code. So I think all the developers should be writing tests. The QA people should be there for training the developers on finding boundary conditions and equivalence value partitions and understanding how to push the software. Our QA people know the software back to front. It's amazing. And if the developers aren't responsible for the quality of what they're doing, then they probably should just go home and stay there.
We also have our QA engineers tend to have specialisms, such as they may be specialized in performance or security, and that's how a lot of the value they add comes from some sort of specialism like that. They do also organize blitz tests and generally organize testing, which is also done by the developers. And there's one other facet of it: when we plan work, they'll figure out how much time they've got, and they can allocate and just figure out where the best value they can deliver is based upon, if there's some big new feature, they'll want to take a look at it.
Coming back for a little bit about documentation question, if the only user stories in the backlog are the only documentation, are there any architecture artifacts, for example, how the architect, what is his output of his work?
What do you do?
What do I do? The code is the best artifact of my work. No, seriously, it's again, I'm an architect that writes code because that's a feedback mechanism for me. As I said before, retrospective documentation that says what was done, not what I am sitting in an ivory tower thinking should be done, is way more valuable. I write. Given what I'm doing in the SaaS world, it's more about infrastructure and network topologies and how the applications are deployed, but fortunately I don't have to worry too much about documentation in what we do.
Does that help?
I think for Confluence we do have some architecture documentation, but again it was done retrospectively with new starters that come in and say, how's this thing work, and then figure it out and write the docs.
So you make the new guys do it. There you go, new hires.
I was just going back to the structure question. Your daily stand-ups, how do you as leaders force them to be 10, 15-minute long stand-ups and not turn into discussions about solving problems or other things like that? Do you set ground rules? Do you have specific artifacts that you come into those meetings with, that you go over an agenda, something like that, to make sure that everyone stays on topic?
For me, it's quite easy. The developers hate them being long, and they're the ones that want to keep it short. They get frustrated and start looking at their watches if someone talks too long. So
it is very much the same for me too. The developers to test them, and the team leads or the scrum masters to test them even more. Right, so they're pushing hard to stop them, and plus some of them occur right next to my desk, so that, there's sort of 5 people standing this far away to me, and I just tell them to piss off if it's going on for too long. Right, it's pretty easy.
But I think just being explicit about what the goal of it is, and it's not like you can have another venue for solving problems and going through architecture discussions and resolving conflicts, and just make it clear what you're trying to get out of that stand-up versus what you're getting other people together to actually solve some problems. It's not like you're going to solve architecture problems in the stand-up. That's not what it's for.
There's a formula for a Scrum, and I was just about to say there's a formula for a Scrum. What I did since the last Scrum, what I'm going to do before the next one, and any impediments. And if you stick to that, and you also have a little thing that only the person holding the thing can talk, then, that sort of helps.
Yeah.
But, yep, we do NBA.com, so I've got a little plush basketball, and we pass it around.
So given Scrum is a fairly flawed approach, there's problems with that, and you don't want it to be a status meeting either. Like, I don't care if you had a one-on-one with your manager. I don't care if you went to a meeting. If that meeting didn't have an outcome that was important for this team, don't mention it. Yeah. If you were away sick, we know you weren't here. If you're going to go to a meeting today, I don't care, unless it's something that we can contribute to before you go in and it's going to affect us. So sometimes like everybody knows how to do it, and they're pretty good. Sometimes all it takes is someone like me just coming up and observing for a couple of days, and then giving them a good whipping to say, look, come on. So even if you just have a guest visitor come from another team, their stand-ups might be equally dysfunctional, but having that external observer just help coach gets things back to reality and gets it back. So we trimmed our 30-person stand-up from 15 minutes to 5.
So just to provide a bit of contrast to hard-ass Josh in the corner, we have documentation writers who go to each team's stand-up. And originally, they would talk about the documentation work they were doing on that day. So it was all very valid stuff, right? But after, with some gentle talking to them, they're basically now silent. Because they're really just consumers of what's going on in the dev team. And they've got plenty of other ways to interact with the developers. So that's an avenue. It has silent participants in your Scrum and your stand-ups.
So I have a question about sort of a mixed group. I have a web development group, and so we're not always just working on software that's going to release in a month or 2 months. We have projects that are ongoing that do have an end date, one release, a single release at the end, but we also have maintenance, operational work, transactional tasks going on with the same group of people over the same period of time. So I just wanted to get your views and opinions on sort of the best way to implement workflows, because that's the biggest thing that I'm working on right now, knowing that I manage people that do both of those kind of tasks.
So I guess first of all in JIRA we have 2 flavours of work. We have feature work going into the next release, and then we have the maintenance work that you speak of that goes into bug fix releases. We consciously separated those 2, right, so that people have focus. Okay, so it's not as if, and a person in any given iteration or sprint will only be working on one of those. And we actually run our bug fixing by rotating teams on. They spend a month on and they rotate off back to feature work. And for that, we use Kanban. We don't actually use Scrum because the bugs are continually flowing. And as well, Kanban removes the overhead of planning. Right, so when you want to get the most out of those teams when they rotate on, get the most out of the time they're spending on bug fix, so you strip out any planning, strip out any extraneous meetings and just get them fixing the bugs.
That's what I'm doing, that's good.
Awesome. Anybody else going to comment on that?
I just had a question. What is the problem that you're having that you want to have solved?
Well, when I first came to manage this team, there was no process whatsoever. People were working on 1,000 things at one time. They weren't getting anything done. They think they were starting things and making progress, and actually they're delivering slower because their focus was so split, things like that. So I'm just trying to find the best process to get the most efficient and frequent output possible for both kinds of work. And I've been experimenting, and I have found that when I have dedicated resources to the transactional tasks and we do a more Kanban type of approach there and have a more Scrum type for the tentpole projects, it does work better. I've only been able to do it 1 or 2 times, but I can tell the difference. So it's just, I'm still trying to find the best workflows and the best processes to use in my group. So that's why I wanted your input on what's worked for you, so I could factor that in. And maybe, during this experimentation phase, I know it's a journey, there's always tweaking, but, I just wanted to see what you guys had done.
So I would say try to do a lot less. I think dedicated resources is right, but try to do less, and what you do, have a very clear definition of what done means. And it's something, and the next thing that I'll say is something that applies to everything about your process. Everyone needs to understand what done means. It needs to be a shared understanding, and that's true of the entire process. If every person on the team doesn't know exactly what the process is, how it works, and where they are in that process, then it's likely to fall over because people are going to sort of be fishing around. Whereas if they've internalized it, you don't have to go and check with somebody, hey, how's this doing? Because they know what their job is and what they're supposed to do and how they get it done. I think that's what I would say.
And I think just starting by building the trust, saying, let's just talk about what you're going to get done. I don't care what you get done in the next 2 weeks, but just think about what you're going to get done in 2 weeks. And your job as the leader is, I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to, within that 2 weeks, it's protected. Once we agree what has to get done, let's just pick some things that are going to get done and get into that cadence. Like, it seems like getting that cadence going and getting them to trust that, as a leader, you're going to make sure that they have a sacred period of getting that stuff done. Then they don't get, sometimes people think that Agile is about ADD and you can change your mind all the time. I think that's the worst thing that can happen, and I think what you have to do is have a good cadence. Your team has to trust that, you know, once they've committed to a set of things that are going to happen within 2 weeks, and they have accountability of getting some stuff done, and you agree what that means, that you create kind of a safe environment for them to concentrate and actually get some stuff done. And it's not about interrupting them every day and we're changing your priorities, because that's just, you'll just end up with an agile ADD organization.
Okay, so I don't know if any of you have had interactions with the companies where you have external responsibilities with other cost centers, not just you, because it seems a little developer-centric. And in other organizations, we have obligations to external stakeholders, and there's a lot of interaction back and forth, and I'm not sure how that affects your agile processes, where you absolutely have to, you know, stop and go back and revisit certain items because, of course, scope changes and et cetera, et cetera. But there are other external entities that are consistently involved in your development, and it wreaks havoc every time. I'm wondering if you've ever experienced anything like that.
Maybe you can define what wreaking havoc means? Like,
well,
what's
good question, yeah. So you have a certain release schedule or release pattern you're working on, and arbitrarily you get changes come from above for no reason, or reasons that are totally beyond you, and they happen to how do I put it? So you get a release schedule going on, and then you get a call or a concern saying, well, we're not going to do this release, not going to manage this release, and if you do want to do it, there are certain guidelines you have to go through by, like your documentation needs to be available 3 to 6 months before, or you need to have had certain boundaries or certain guidelines in order for you to be able to install or put something in production, and all that's just a lot of what I call BS, but we're mandated by certain organizational structures to keep all that in flow. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Because it's a lot of developer-centric. I hear you all talking. It seems like you have a lot of control. In companies where you don't have that much control, but you want to kind of, jump into that sort of an agile practice, what would you do? And I'm wondering if any of you have had that kind of an experience.
Yeah, so I guess, you just defined the last 6 years of my life was, within IBM trying to get 300 people to go agile, and you had, business processes, documentation, websites. So, our first thing was everything you do in IBM has to be behind IBM.com. And he said the first thing to be agile is we need our own website, we want our own domain name, and we want to release often. Like, how do you do that? So as you said, like it's, this is where you have to start, explaining to people, like it's a community, you have to explain to people what your goals are, show them what the benefit is. And I think one of the biggest things we put in was a structure of trust for our team as we went through this long process, because it's not something you're going to change overnight, about just figuring out what are the most important things for you, for your team to get maybe better cadence going, start being more iterative, and then how can you have like a deflector who can deflect some of the other stuff so that your team doesn't get bombarded by all the other stuff that's happening in the organization, and you can slowly start changing, and you have to pick the things that matter the most for you. For example, for us, one of the things that I cared about the most was our product managers were liars. Like they went to customers with PowerPoint slides, and it was the wrong shit. We didn't build that stuff. So we got together and we said the first thing we want to fix is we want to stop the lying. So we picked something. Again, being agile, just pick something you want to fix and do it, and then don't try and boil the ocean all at once. So that's the first thing. So for us, what that meant was a structural realignment in our team. So we brought the product managers out of this other organization. We brought them onto our team, and we said we're going to have one backlog. You can have all the PowerPoint slides you want, but it has to be from the backlog. Like that's like within 1 year, that's what we want to do. And we agreed on, they talked to us about what they cared about. They cared about, how do we communicate, things that are really going to ship? Because you guys on Agile, you always say that every iteration you're going to change what the backlog is. So we kind of communicated back and forth like what their fears were with us doing Agile, and we communicated what we wanted from him. We worked on that first, and it took us a year probably to get through that. And while that was happening, we had someone to kind of deflect all the other stuff that was happening in the org, and we had to do some stuff, like as you said, like compliance, or there's some checklists, and we literally had 2 people full time. Their job was to make that happen, and just make it happen in the easiest way possible, so I didn't have to care about it, and then we worked on one problem at a time like that. So, but it's not easy. But pick something that you can, pick something that you can work on, do some structural alignments, and then don't try and boil the ocean.
Great question. Any other comments, Jeff? Or
I would just say it sounds like you don't have much buy-in for how you're developing software. If you've got people who are telling you, okay, do this, and then when you're in the middle of doing it, they come back and they say, wait, don't do this anymore. We want you to do that. So to some extent, you may need a little more buy-in to how you guys are developing software. But also, you have to be able to react to what the business needs. And so in that sense, you need, when somebody does come to you and say, we need you to do this instead of that, they need to be willing to hear you, and you say, okay, if that's what you want, then here are the trade-offs. Are you still comfortable with that? And you have to be able to give them that information so they can make the decision. But
I think it's a good point. I think what I've learned is if you try and build software within a large organization and a large team, probably the single most reason for failure is listening to everybody in the org telling you what they think you should be doing, because you'll never ship. So it gets the agile thing of just pick a couple things to do, and as the leader of that team, you have to provide the cadence, provide the structure, and you just can't react to everything all the time. So just pick some cadence, pick some things you want to succeed on, and maybe pick someone in your org who can help. You're not going to especially in a huge organization, you're not going to get buy-in from everybody. There's no way you can do that. You have to do that incrementally, and you have to set up a good structure to make that happen.
Do you have any tips on how to get your team to estimate stories better? We've been struggling with this. Yeah, it's really painful. Okay.
I always suck at it.
I suck at it too.
So I continue to push to this day for this notion from the JIRA teams of work out your average velocity and use your historical velocity as an indicator for your future, for sizing your future iterations, and they just tell me to piss off, right? So that being said, they're pretty good at hitting their commitments. So instinctively, they have a good understanding and a good feeling about what they can do, and I'm happy with that, right? That only works when you have tight, cohesive teams who are really experienced with the code base. And fortunately, that's the position I'm in. So I'm not pushing them too hard at getting on there, coming down hard on them for not producing story points and numbers and all that notion.
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of crap in some ways. If I'm going to spend a lot of time with my team, there's a couple things that I cared about the most, which was for the big items that are maybe as a VP of engineering or as an architect on some of my other jobs, what I cared about the most is that we had a shared understanding of the problems we're trying to solve. What are the problems we're trying to solve, and if they're big, how do we break them down, and how do we iterate on this in some way? And the second thing was the prioritization of things, what things we're not going to do, so we can focus. And so if I have time to talk with my team, that's what I cared about the most. And then whether or not we estimated at 8 story points or 50, it didn't provide us as much value. So we tried and tried. We were building agile tools with burn down charts, and I personally never saw it work that well yet. So I don't know. How about?
Does estimation work for anybody?
So it does work for us, and I'll say two things. I would only leave you with two things in terms of making it easier and better. One of them is that we did find collaborative estimation to be way more effective. Not only was it a lot faster and a lot more accurate, but it also could be a lot of fun, because basically people could get into a room. Sometimes we would do it late in the day and somebody would bring in beers, and essentially people would go back and forth at each other and say, hey, I think this is that, and you would argue with each other. But making it a collaborative process, and there's things like planning poker and other variations of that can make it a lot of fun. The other big thing, though, is if there are people like me or like him who are using story points as a way to judge success or failure on the teams, it's going to fail, guaranteed. The point of doing story point estimations is for the team. It is not for anyone else. It's a tool so that they can know more about what they can and can't do, because we're humans and we make all sorts of stupid mistakes when we try to guess how long it's going to take to do things. But it is their tool. It is not for other people, so that they can try to be better about committing to what they can do.
A tip I'd like to add as well is we've seen a lot more success by making sure the stories are as small as possible. So I think we rarely, I don't know if we ever allow anyone to go over 2 days for a story. And if it's going to go longer than that, then we spike it and come out with a better estimate next time.
When your story's so short, do you then have tasks, or I'm sorry. So when you have stories that are only 2 days, then do you assign tasks and go through a lot of tasking on those, or do you just stay at the story level?
So it depends. We divide things up to our tasks. We basically have technical tasks which aren't delivering any specific customer-facing value, and our stories will be tiny. So our stories will be add a keyboard shortcut to do this. It's a tiny story, and we'll split them up to make them all tiny. And we may group them together in an epic. We may not.
You shouldn't dictate. It should be it's up to the team. It's up to the team, right? They know what's going to work for them and what isn't. I have some teams who do it at the task level, and some who keep things relatively coarse. And they're the ones whose necks are on the line. They put their necks on the line by committing to getting certain things done. And however they want to organize themselves to do it, the onus is on them. And they prefer it that way.
Can I offer some disagreement? Some non-consensus? So I'm on a team that has a very different view of estimation in that in the traditional sense, it's a waste of time because we're all really bad at predicting the future with our crystal balls. But one of the things that we do that has really good success is we try to same size our work breakdown. So the way that we break our features down and break them into stories, we try to make them about the same size so that both product management understands approximately how much work the scope of this large initiative or epic is. And we have some accountability for how long we take on these items. And we monitor approximately how long these things take so we can see, are we taking about the same amount of time on the work breakdown? So estimation is more implicit in how we break down the work versus how long we think it's going to take with our predictive abilities. So.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this topic and move on to one more because we got only a few more minutes left. And just so you know, actually a gentleman from Opower is going to be giving a presentation tomorrow, same time in this room. And part of his presentation is going to talk a little bit about how they break down all the different types of tasks into different levels. So, new topic?
So we have semi-successfully implemented agile at our company, which is great. We've kind of hit our stride and seen the benefit, and that's been recognized throughout the organization, which is fantastic because they weren't willing to acknowledge that we could go down that path and be successful, but now they're seeing the results. One of the things that's happening to us right now is we have our product management organization that wants to get on the bus, but now they want to drive the bus versus just be a part of it. So that's our biggest obstacle. So they're spinning up their own agile movement, if you will, and kind of ignoring that we've already done it. So I'm wondering what your obstacles were when each of you kind of either at your current position or other jobs. What's your biggest obstacles that you overcome during your implementation phases?
Well, I think that was something similar to what I talked about, in terms of product management and lying and how do you communicate to customers. But I mean, just having that conversation about what the expectations were, like for that organizational alignment are the hard things to do. Like testing alignment when you have different organizations and then you have, development separate and kind of trying to figure out, how do you want to play together and getting that kind of orchestrated without trying to boil the ocean and get everybody aligned at the same time. That's really challenging. It took a couple years.
I think for us, bringing product managers right into the team to sit with the team, right, and establish a really close bond with the team. Also, the weight of numbers, right? There's a huge number of developers, small number of product managers. That helps. And then in planning sessions, just basic stuff in planning sessions, it's not really the product manager that's committing to the work. So the developers have to have a huge buy-in to get the thing done, right? The developers aren't all going to stand up and go, yes, we're going to do this, unless they believe in it. We have a little bit of a similar challenge, but it's not down at the planning, down at the individual iteration level. It's more about at the release planning. It's more about the future product roadmap. And I think that's where product managers and devs have to have a lot of human interactions outside of any process. It's an exercise of the product managers trying to distill the information they can bring about the outside world make it useful to developers, but for us building developer tools, it's especially important that the developers have a massive say in the roadmap for the product. And once we set that up at the roadmap level, everything else just works, we tend to find.
I sort of got two things from you. One of them was, how does the product stuff integrate with what the engineering folks are doing, and then what are the impediments? I would say that most product people are awful, is the really short version. 90% of the product managers I've worked with are either mediocre or bad. But the 10% of product managers that are good are incredible. And they could be such a force multiplier for a team and a product to be successful that they're worth trying to find. The other problem is there's no training for being a product manager. You may find them in somebody who's an engineer. They could be a QA person. They might be a project manager. You never really know, and you just kind of have to keep your ear to the ground about where they are, and then and give them a team, and then be ready to take them off if they suck at it. But it's really hard because most of them are bad. In terms of what are the biggest impediments, I think it's realizing that there are. Whatever works for you in the way that you build software now is not going to be right 6 months from now. And you always have to be looking for what's wrong with how you're developing software, and be open to big changes, even though it's going to be painful. If your agile transition isn't painful, you're doing it wrong.
That's a pretty good way to end it. I don't want to cut you off just yet, but I am. So we're at the top of the hour, which means we're actually done for the session. But what we'll do before you run out of here is that we'll actually keep the decompression chamber right here. So maybe if you have 1 or 2 burning questions that you want to get to these guys, you guys can stick around for an extra 5-10 minutes. All right. We'll do that. Be sure to do a survey for this session, and also the Summit Bash is in an hour. It's at 3rd and Howard at the Thirsty Bear Brewery. I encourage you guys all to go. So thanks again, and we'll see you bright and early in the morning. So there's one question I had back here. Did you want to answer that on the way out?
So how do you keep your developers accountable for both the quality and the process for agile development?
Did you guys get that question?
In my experience, most developers want to do it. And it's something that gives them a better sense of satisfaction at the end of the day, because of the way we develop software using this. And those developers that don't want to participate in that are probably, you say there's 90% of bad product managers, there's 90% of bad developers as well. They're probably people that probably shouldn't be writing software, but I don't know, it's an innate thing that good developers want to participate in software development in this fashion. So if they give up that right, then and let product managers take over the asylum, then they've abdicated it themselves. So I think it's self-organizing teams will ensure fidelity in the process.
I wanted to add as well. I completely agree with Josh that they shouldn't let things slip and not care. They're probably not very good developers if they do. And one thing we've done to try and get them to step up and be more proud is the demo sessions we do every 2 weeks. If they can demo something that looks awesome to their peers, then they get a lot of that makes them very happy.
I guess quickly what we did was make sure that developers are aware that they are the last gate before customers. Right? So there is not some QA safety net in Atlassian, right? So that is a big thing for them. And what we noticed in the JIRA team at least was that when we embarked on a lot of user experience change, they needed to be educated as to what quality was with that type of change. They had to be trained as to give some awareness of a great user experience. And before that, it wasn't through, they weren't intentionally letting stuff through on the usability side. They just didn't know what really good UX was. Once they got that appreciation, then the quality bar went right up. So training plays a part.
In your opinion, is there a role for a wiki in software development, agile software development, and what is that role?
It's like a softball for you. Come on.
So we all use the wiki for, or the products do. We come up with lightweight specs, and they're drafted up. They're an evolutionary process, I suppose. We wouldn't want to document because there's so many changes and revisions being made all the time. We get a lot of feedback, a lot of comments from various people who are interested in that spec, and they'll be often incorporated into the fact that it's an evolving document and it has, links to a lot of other features. It's an obvious place to put that information.
Yeah, and one note on that is actually that wiki is obviously available to everybody in the company. So I'm in marketing, and there's lots of guys sitting around me that are in support and that are in various parts of the organization, and we all have access to that wiki.
Well,
so when do you put it in JIRA? When do you put it in Confluence, I guess is the question.
So to me, Confluence is a living document of the understanding of the team as at now. So while I'm reading it, it should be updated. There's always pages that go stale, but it is like the documentation question before. It's like, well, that is the document for me. That's what the knowledge of the acquired knowledge of the team is being recorded as history passes. JIRA is for being able to trace why a particular part of the software does something. Now, that may be backed by more esoteric discussion in the wiki, but JIRA is there as the matter of record for why the code is the way it is, apart from what I think are the best documentation, which are the acceptance tests. And if you don't have them, then you're not documenting your system very well, are we?
Any other last couple questions?
This one might be more directed toward John McGill. But with a large organization, you were IBM, I work for CSC, 90,000 plus employees worldwide. Okay, and being the new guy at 10 years there, how do you influence the rest of these people to opt in? So instead of me assigning things still in the stand-ups, how do you get people to kind of care, I guess?
Like, are you talking about like the individual developers or the organization as a whole?
Everyone, the organization, like it's a cultural change, right? How do you, what are some
it's
tips
like, I
for
think it's like
influencing?
everything hard that you want to do, you have to start small somewhere. Like start with some wins, like that you can see. Like whether it's the team that, you have a team who's been, they've had a hard time getting some stuff done. Like start with getting some wins on that team, and then it self-fulfills itself. Just don't try and boil the ocean. So just try, again, and you have to, I don't know if you have a whole team who's resisting something, you have to talk to them about what's...
It's just culture. Well, that's the way they've been doing it for the last 20 years. Yeah, but... So you're thinking of it like a small organization, whereas you can't do it physically, it's got to be electronically because you've got people in 3 different time zones. I mean, people in India, people in Sydney, people in...
The morning stand-up is still a small team. Like even if you're geographically dispersed, you still have localized teams that are taking things off the backlog, and that each team member should be signing up for it, saying that's what I want to do today, and I'll need your help, Paul, today to do that. And then as the sun moves, I mean, I've run a project where we've had 8 teams across 8 different locations across the world, and it worked perfectly well if people are pulling and they're the ones saying this is what I want to do. 90,000 people, you don't have a project like that. That is a completely different view of ideology. We're talking about getting some software written today.
Well, government, so hard to fire people in government world. So we're trying to implement Scrum, and we went into it with the whole, right out of the textbook kind of methodology towards it, and that didn't seem to work. We, brought everybody in, had our poker, and, it was hard to get people to create the stories, create the tasks, to vote on how long it would take. So then we pulled all that away, and we said, okay, team leads, you're the one who were talking anyway, you come in and do it, and that's not working. So we're not really getting a strive in this, and we're trying to figure out how to make it work.
So I would say that in my experience, when you roll this stuff out, you have to start at the small level. You have to start where he's talking about. If you can't get teams to do successful iterations, short iterations, then everything else will fail. Everything else. All the other kind of stuff you're doing will not work. That's the first thing. The other thing is you have to put them in a position where some of them will fail. If there are not some teams failing in that transition, and then you sit down with the team and they all say collectively, like, we failed. Why did we fail? What did we do differently? Then there's...
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think taking the textbook and applying it is probably the wrong way. I think just sit down with your team and say, like, what were we supposed to do last month, and why did we do it or not do it, and pick some, like, instead of going from a book down, go from, like, what problems does the team want to solve? Like, what are we supposed to be doing? What's our business outcome? And let's figure out how to solve some of those. You know, what do we want to solve this month, and then apply some techniques from some of the, you know, whether it be Kanban or Scrum or whatever else to solve that. And again, I think the first thing is have a timeline, like you know, have a time box thing, and then try and solve those things. But ask your team to be engaged.
Every reaction you just had is to go back to the way it was. Like it's exactly the wrong direction. So if you're saying team leads should be the only, bring the team leads because they're the only ones talking. Make sure the team leads aren't there so that the developers are the ones doing the talk. They have no choice other than to participate. Get someone in to help. Just get a coach in for a while and get them to help. Because you cannot read a book and do this. You cannot. It has evolved over decades, and only now, like I've been doing it for 10 years, only now people are starting to go, okay, this is something we can apply. You can't read a book and do it. You have to learn it, and it is very difficult to not use all the learned habits, which are bad habits that you've had in the rest of your career, and then go, okay, well, I'll react to this and apply an anti-pattern, and it's just made it worse. And Agile failed. I think failing fast is great. Small failures are fantastic. It gives people a different perspective. Let them fail. It's fine. Set it up so that it's okay. Well, there is a consequence because continued failure equals death. But the consequence of not failing is you think you're doing it right and you've not made any change. You have to be able to fail, but you've got to do it quickly. And the consequence of failing slowly is the same. It's death. And Agile practices absolutely give you an imperative to fail quickly if you're going to fail. Do the hardest, most risky thing first. Because if that ain't going to work, the rest of it doesn't matter.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up. One more question. Apologies to you. I saw him first.
Okay. I've run a couple Agile teams, usually 2 to 4 week sprints. But where I am right now, we started with 4 week sprints, and our features were just, part of it's because we're working on very foundation level infrastructure, but the sprints, we weren't able to get features out in our 4 weeks, which I thought was long, and we're moving to 6. I'm trying to figure out how to...
One day.
Right, I mean, 4 is the longest I've ever done before, and now...
Mate, go the other way. If you're backing away from what the practitioners are saying, this is how we do it. If the best development teams of the world are saying this is how we do it, and you're going the wrong way, you're going the wrong way.
As silly as his recommendation of doing one day may sound, I completely agree with that. When we transitioned our team into Agile, we actually made them, no one was getting it. And then we basically put everyone in one room, and we said, we broke them into 2 teams, and we basically said, we want you to deliver, each of you to deliver one feature, one iteration. And we did 2 iterations in a day. And of course, you know, the first iteration, both teams failed. And the second iteration, one team succeeded and the other team failed. But what happened is they walked out of that room completely energized. And they finally saw what it meant to do this, and they wanted it badly. And they were petitioning everyone in the organization to let them do that. But unless they can see that whole picture on a regular basis, and you sort of lower the water to see where the rocks are, like it wasn't until they were in a room and we said, do the whole thing, automated testing, everything, do it now. There's nothing else that you need. Then it sort of it put the focus on what was wrong with the process, and they got it and they excited. But yeah, do it in an extreme way and see what happens.
Less meetings, less ceremony,
I will say that in the JIRA team, maybe a little bit more conservative, we suffer from the same thing. There is a tendency to build plumbing and to build wide, fat, shiny white pipes. And really, when you ask the team why they want to do that, it's because they don't feel they're going to get another shot at it, right? So they feel they need, they're going to get one bite at the cherry, one chance to build this cool thing, and then product management's going to be off on some other shiny object over there. So that's what we changed, right? That's what we've worked hard at changing, is saying, guys, you have an opportunity to refactor. Do just enough right now, refactor aggressively later as new requirements emerge, and we will give you some continuity of theme in the roadmap. So, there is opportunity to refactor. You're not doing a right angle turn off on some other new crazy feature.
All right, thanks guys. I really appreciate it. And thank you for staying late.